Porcupine Tree never, when we make records, we never think about singles, radio tracks, focus tracks. And Time Flies was really, when it was written, it was just part of this continuous flow of music. And I'm always as surprised as anyone, possibly even more so, when the record company come back and say, we think this is the focus track. And you know, to be honest, I would never have guessed Time Flies would be it. But that's always the way with me. I'm always surprised by the tracks that people tend to pick up on, or tend to have a more kind of mainstream appeal in that sense. I have my own twisted idea about what the commercial tracks are, and I'm always wrong. So this was no exception. Time Flies actually is the longest piece within the song cycle. It's about 12 minutes. So it's the longest piece of music within the song cycle. But we've done an edit, and it seems to work really well. And people seem to be responding very well to that as one of the highlights of the song cycle.
And the best thing that you can do is take whatever comes to you.
I'm always absorbing new influences. I'm always absorbing new music. But I have to say that most of this sounds like a very arrogant thing to say, but I don't mean it to sound arrogant. My biggest influence now these days is myself. What I mean by that is that actually the one thing that influences me more than anything else is not wanting to repeat what I've done in the past, or what the band have done in the past. So that becomes a very, very strong influence on anything you're doing. If you find yourself starting to write something that, I kind of feel like I've done that before, then immediately you move into something else. So you're looking for something that's going to be fresh to you. And that actually exerts a very strong influence on the style of the music. I mean, and again, another thing to say is that I think some people sometimes forget that other things other than music can be the biggest influences to musicians. Film is very important to me. I'm a big fan of movies and books and experience. There's a lot of experience in this album. So I always feel it's slightly misleading to talk about the music. I listen to a lot of music all the time. I think music has less of an influence on me than it did when I was 20. Then I was like a sponge, everything I heard and I liked kind of went into my own music. I think that's less true nowadays. The music that I listen to now doesn't really find its way into my own music as easily as perhaps films and experiences do. Again, I find it very difficult to predict always what is going to be met with the most kind of enthusiastic response. I mean, sometimes live tracks obviously make more sense live than they do in the studio, and vice versa. It's very difficult to predict, and I'm always surprised by what seems to go over best. I mean, some of our fan base love the more kind of progressive, the more involved, the more complex stuff, and other fans tend to like the more kind of song-orientated stuff. So our sets always tend to be a mixture of the two, and I think in that respect that's kind of where the secret of Porcupine Tree lies, that we're actually a band that make progressive, for want of a better word, music, but at the core of our sound really is a love of good melodies and good songs. And I think ultimately that's what people respond to the best, and those are the ones that tend to endure over the years as live favourites. Well, if it was someone from history, and the fact that they're no longer alive is not an issue. There are some musicians that were very important to me when I was growing up that fortunately have passed away, and filmmakers too. Stanley Kubrick, the movie director, is one of my favourite film directors. And what I love about people like Stanley Kubrick, and also David Lynch would be my living equivalent, is that these are guys that are very integrity is a word that kind of sums up exactly what they do, and there's no sense ever that they're being influenced or forced into doing things by the industry, and that's a very hard. It's very hard to get yourself into that position in any artistic industry where you are completely left to your own devices, and all of the mainstream kind of part of the industry respects that you have integrity and they don't interfere. So Kubrick and David Lynch for me as filmmakers. Actually, right now, the one guy that I really admire as a musician, probably more than any other, is Trent Reznor. A, because of his production. Mm-hmm. I just think he makes extraordinary sounding records. And B, again, because he's also someone that's positioned himself within an industry which is known for being you know, the kind of industry that crushes talent and crushes creativity in the worst possible ways. And he's found a way to do the records exactly the way he wants. He's been successful, and I still think he's very passionate about music. So it's someone I've not met, but I would really love to meet. Well, I've spoken so much about digital music. I mean, I can summarize my feelings about digital music. It's a very complex area, because I would be the first person to admit that without file sharing and without digital music and without the internet, Porcupine Tree would be nowhere near well known as we are. We're not the kind of band you're going to hear on the radio. We're not the kind of band you're going to see on MTV. We're not the kind of band you're going to read about in most of the mainstream music magazines. So how does a band like us perpetuate? How do we build a fan base? Well, the way we've done it actually is two ways. Firstly, by touring and word of mouth, but secondly, by the fans have created, begat more fans by sharing files, and that's great, and I love that side of things. But there's no question for me that a lot of the romance of music for me is tied up in the physical product. I still love the kind of romance. I still love vinyl. I still love the romance of gatefold sleeves, lyric sheets, taking a record out, putting it on, even turning over the side. That for me was all kind of a ritual, and I realise I'm kind of old-fashioned in that respect. But I think the digital, the whole problem with digital music and the revolution of digital music is it does to an extent reduce music to the same level as a piece of software. And it's not software, it's art. It's a beautiful thing. And to take away that kind of physical, tangible presence for music for me is not a nice development. I kind of mourn the classic, album covers, and I guess it's kind of fetishistic in a way to think of that way. But then people are fetishistic about their iPods, and they're organising their iPods. I'm not really into that. I don't own an iPod. I'm not really into that idea of music as soft files on a hard drive. I don't think I'm ever going to love it. But you know what? I'm old.